Allison received her undergraduate degree in business administration at Tennessee Technological University and a JD from that great university, Orange University, in the eastern part of the state, University of Tennessee College of Law. After 10 years as a private attorney focused on child and family issues, she served as assistant district attorney in the 13th Judicial District in Middle Tennessee. Allison is on the board of the Tennessee Research Institute, as well as boards of nonprofit organizations advocating children's rights and human rights for disabled persons. She's also a public speaker at high school on challenges faced by teenagers, with which she is familiar because she has a 25-year-old son and 5-year-old twins. That's probably another story. We're happy to have Allison with us tonight, Alison Watkins.
Thank you. Let's see if I can figure this out. Where's the mouse? There it is. Let's see here. There we go. It's yours. All right. Welcome. I am honored to be here tonight speaking before you. I was actually born and raised just down the road and up the hill in Cumberland County, Tennessee. That's where my law practice was located and where I served as a prosecutor. I now live in Knoxville with my family, and tonight we're going to talk about two of the main law enforcement issues that come up when legalization of medical cannabis is discussed. First of all, regardless of where we stand politically or how we feel about marijuana, you can love it, hate it, or not give a damn about it, we all at least deserve to know the truth and to be guided in our decision-making by the truth. And as Paul just told us, we've been misled and denied the truth for decades. The origins of marijuana prohibition were not based on concerns for your health or science or even the relative risks of marijuana. Prohibition originated on racial bias, misplaced fears, and just the need to fill a bureaucratic vacancy after the end of alcohol prohibition. Nevertheless, prohibition has marched on with the goals of reducing supply and demand of drugs and reducing the negative consequences of drug use. What's happened, though, is this. Demand has remained constant. We have an unending supply of drugs that just continue to get stronger and cheaper. Our U.S. addiction rate has remained unchanged for over 100 years. It's remained at 1.3% for over 100 years. And we're all paying the crime and social costs of this war through increased violence, racial injustice, and lives being ruined by drug convictions. Really, the only thing that the war on drugs has been successful on is this: locking people up. The U.S. has the largest per capita prison population in the world. We beat Cuba, Russia, and even South Africa under apartheid. The United States represents 5% of the world population, but 25% of the world's prison population. Now, folks, as a former prosecutor, I sent people to jail. This number one spot does not make me proud at all. It's a signal to me that we're doing something gravely wrong, and we're all going to pay and be victims until we change this picture. Of all drug arrests today, nearly 50% are for marijuana. Now, when we talk about legalizing any kind of drug, especially something as benign as medical marijuana, people get scared. And they're scared that if we do anything short of prohibition, then we're going to send the wrong message to kids and somehow make it seem that we're condoning drug use. Well, the war on drugs is often justified as one big child protection act, actually. So we've relied on scare tactics to educate, and prevent kids from using drugs. And this is what one would look like today, actually. Weed kills. Of course, you'd have to have the disclaimer at the bottom now for all the states that have legalized it in some way. But have these scare tactics worked? Well, what we're seeing is marijuana and illicit drug use has remained constant for the last 20 years. So no, prevention through scare tactics do not work. Strict regulation and truthful education do work, though, in reducing demand for drugs. Does anyone know which drug it's worked for? Any guesses? Tobacco. Nothing can hook you and kill you like cigarettes. In fact, experts and some recovering addicts will tell you that cigarettes are just as hard, if not harder, to quit than drugs like cocaine and heroin. Yet what we've seen over the last decade is that over 50% of smokers have quit, and that's without putting any smoker in jail or burning down any tobacco field. They've quit because we've used smart and responsible regulation and very effective and truthful anti-smoking public health campaigns. Smoking feels anything but condoned. I mean, you pay higher taxes on cigarettes, there's strict restrictions on where you can and cannot smoke them, there's limits on advertising. But what we've done is we've taught kids that, yeah, although cigarettes are legal, they're harmful, and the demand for them is decreasing dramatically. Not so for marijuana. Its use remains constant because as kids are getting older, they're realizing marijuana is not as harmful as what we were told. So all the exaggeration, all the scare tactics, all that's managed to do is make kids quit trusting the information that they're given, not just about marijuana, but about all drugs. So it's really helpful to us that we have some states that have legalized, and we can see what's happened to teen use in those states. Colorado, teen use has steadily declined. Last year by 9%. Also last year, they took in $125 million in tax revenue. They're saving millions in law enforcement costs because they're not having to chase down marijuana cases any longer, and they can use that time and money to actually work on serious violent crimes, many of which involve child victims. And folks, let me tell you, that goes much further in protecting our kids than any kind of drug prohibition ever will. So, I'm a mom. I want to protect my kids. I don't want my kids using drugs. Nobody wants kids using drugs, except illegal drug dealers. Today, under Prohibition, it is much easier for kids to get their hands on marijuana than alcohol or cigarettes. Dealers are selling to anyone who wants to buy. They're not checking IDs. They have no control whatsoever over the quality of what they're selling, what it's laced with. They answer to no one. But you can bet that they're going to try to get anyone buying marijuana from them to start buying heroin or meth or cocaine from them because it's much more profitable for them to be selling those than marijuana. Stores, on the other hand, they're not selling alcohol and cigarettes to kids because they have valuable licenses that they could lose. If a kid gets caught with cigarettes or beer, you can pretty easily figure out where they got it. You can trace it right back to where they got it. Not true for illegal drugs. Marijuana, they're not going to tell on illegal drug dealers. So, legalization would bring sales above ground, and distributors of medical marijuana would be under strict regulations, and they will have those valuable licenses to lose if they don't adhere to those regulations. Marijuana prohibition is doing nothing to protect our kids. It's actually putting our kids at more risk. But wait, we can't leave without talking about the gateway theory, because opponents to legalization always want to talk about the gateway theory. Folks, I'm going to tell you, it's safe to put it to rest. 20 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine found there is no conclusive evidence that the drug effects of marijuana are causally linked to the subsequent abuse of other drugs. Alcohol is actually the most widely used substance. It's initiated the earliest, and it's most commonly used in the progression of substance abuse. Marijuana is actually more often consumed as an exit drug. States that have legalized are finding that people are substituting marijuana for other things such as alcohol and prescription opioids, and they're seeing lower rates of opiate abuse and overdose deaths. That's huge, given the state of the U.S. heroin crisis that we're facing today. So it's always prohibition, never the drug, never the substance that creates the gateway to where we don't want to go. It's prohibition that opens the door to that dangerous and illegal drug world that kids have to go to buy their marijuana from an illegal dealer in the black market. Now, when we talk about legalizing medical marijuana, law enforcement and other agencies go into a panic, thinking there's going to be a huge influx of drug drivers taking over the roads. And it's true, people do drive differently after they've consumed marijuana. They tend to weave, and they tend to have slower reaction time. However, they compensate for this by driving more slowly and engaging in fewer lane changes. And this compensatory driving behavior doesn't lead to an increased risk in motor vehicle accidents at all. Actually, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in 2014 released this study in which they analyzed the crash risk associated in DUIs involving alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs. And as you can see, marijuana doesn't even show up on the chart. It's so low on the scale of driving impairment compared to other substances and medications. So the study found that drivers under the influence of marijuana are no more likely to crash than sober drivers. The picture only changes when alcohol is involved, when alcohol is present. Unlike alcohol, studies have shown that experienced users, patients, they become tolerant to the effects, especially in the areas of psychomotor performance. Now, I'm not saying it's okay to get stoned and go drive. I'm not advocating that at all. But I am saying that our laws in Tennessee for impaired driving, whether it be for alcohol or other drugs, are adequate. And legalizing medical marijuana does not give patients the right to drive impaired. There's a lot of misinformation being spread around currently in this area, and one group in particular that's doing a lot of it is the Colorado Drug Enforcement or Colorado Drug Investigators Association. And they're traveling around the country to anyone who will give them an audience and passing out something called the Rocky Mountain HIDA report. A lot of our legislators have it in hand or on their desk. And they're claiming that since Colorado legalized marijuana, they have seen an increase in the number of drivers testing positive for marijuana. Well, that may be true, but testing positive for marijuana only means that the marijuana metabolite is being found in their system. And most of us know that anyone who consumes marijuana is going to test positive for that metabolite for days, if not weeks later. So these post-accident results, they're showing the metabolite, but they're not showing anything about actual inebriation at the time of an accident or that marijuana contributed in any way to the accident. The best gauge is to look at states that have legalized and see what's happened to their highway traffic fatality rates. In Colorado, their traffic fatality rates have been the lowest they've seen in decades since they've legalized. Washington State, same story. Their state patrol annual reports have shown traffic fatality rates to be at an all-time low, and their DUI arrests are steadily declining. So legalizing medical marijuana does not endanger our children, nor does it endanger our roads. When we talk about legalizing medical marijuana, we're not talking about a free-for-all. We're talking about smart legalization, strict and responsible regulation, and truthful, effective education. Simply put, when we legalize medical marijuana, we're saying patients are not criminals and should not be treated as criminals. It would make a huge difference to this guy. This is Raymond Schwab. He is a Gulf War veteran. He works for the Department of Veterans Affairs. He suffers from chronic pain and PTSD. The VA was willing to give him plenty of prescriptions, and unfortunately that led to a heroin addiction. He did go through rehab and through the use of cannabis therapy, overcame that addiction, and has been sober since 2011. He found medical marijuana to be the only thing that actually worked for his pain and PTSD. So he decided he would move his family from Kansas to Colorado, where he could grow medical marijuana and help other veterans like him. So one day while he was out of state preparing for this move, the state of Kansas gets wind of this and comes in and takes all 5 of his kids into state custody. This happened last April. He's seen his kids 3 times since then, and he's still fighting to get them back. So, in one state, the medicine that he takes makes him a legal patient. In the next, he's an unfit parent. Does anyone recognize this guy? He's been in the news too recently. This is Alan Peake. He's a conservative Republican state representative in the state of Georgia. Folks, he's breaking the laws openly to help the sick kids in his state get the medical marijuana that they need. It's very similar to our state's CBD laws. It may be legal, but it's illegal to get it here. But that's the only way to do it, and he's doing it openly. So we have patients going to jail, losing their kids. We have law enforcement, judges, prosecutors standing up and speaking out. We have doctors sponsoring state medical marijuana bills and government officials engaging in civil disobedience to this extent. What else do we need to tell us it's time to end marijuana prohibition? Tennesseans and the rest of Americans, they're no longer being fooled. The majority support the legalization of medical marijuana. The truth is out, you can't take it back. And it's hard to escape what common sense and basic decency dictate what we need to do. We need to end this heartless and disastrous war and put new policies in place and embrace them that are grounded in truth, health, science, and compassion. So please reach out to your legislators. Thank you.